Some betrayals don't arrive with a warning. They come wrapped in silence, in unreturned calls, in changed locks, in a cold smile standing at the door of a house you believed would always be yours. I was on a red-eye flight home when it happened. No text, no voicemail. Just me, somewhere above the clouds, completely unaware that the two people who raised me were sitting around a conference table, laughing, signing papers, and quietly erasing my entire future. I noticed it before I even reached the driveway, a sign. Massive and white, hammered into the front lawn like a flag planted after a conquest. I sat in my car for a long time, engine still running, hands frozen on the steering wheel. Staring at the front door, I had painted myself that deep shade off-green my grandfather had always loved. The house looked exactly the same. Everything else had changed forever. I walked up, slid my key into the lock and felt nothing move, just cold resistance. A door that no longer knew me, then it swung open from the inside. My father stood in the frame, swirling a glass off-scotch like a man toasting a victory. No embrace, no apology, not even the decency to look uncomfortable. My mother lingered just behind him, eyes fixed on the floor as though something there desperately needed her attention. "We made a decision," my father said flatly. "The estate was becoming a burden. It was the right call." Right call. That's what he called selling the house my grandfather had built with his own hands. The same house I had patched, repaired, and given my weekends to for years, while I was thousands of miles away on a business trip. No conversation. No heads up, just a cold transaction, signed and sealed before I even landed. My grandfather was never wealthy by the world's measure, but he was rich in ways that actually mattered, in patience, in integrity, in the quiet kind of strength that plants seeds for people who come after you. He had spent 50 years pouring himself into that land. And through every holiday dinner, every summer evening on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, the understanding between us had always been unspoken but clear. When the time came, the estate would be mine. Not because I was the favorite, because I was the one who stayed. While my parents burned through money on trips they couldn't afford and chased investments that always seemed to collapse, I was up on the roof replacing damaged shingles after the worst storm that season hit. I was the one sitting in a hospital chair beside Grandpa, listening to him describe the creek along the property's eastern edge, the oak tree he had planted the year my mother came into the world. My parents looked at that land and saw a way out off their own mess. I looked at it and saw a promise. After they showed me the door, and I mean that literally, I drove to the nearest motel and rented the cheapest room available. Thin walls, a heater thatch-rattled, carpet that smelled like decades of other people's bad nights. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the single cardboard box I had managed to tote before they turned me away. Grandpa's junk, my mother had called it. Old receipts, yellowed maps. Hand-drawn sketches of the land going back 40 years. I'm not sure why I started going through it that night. Maybe I just needed to feel near something honest. I sorted through faded farm layouts and letters written in handwriting I recognized, until my fingers caught on something stiff and flat, tucked deep inside the lining of his old leather sketchbook. It had been folded carefully, deliberately. The way you fold something you want someone to find. I opened it slowly, and the whole shape of everything changed. It was a deed, a separate, independently recorded deed stamped, signed, and legally filed, covering 3 acres on which the house itself sat. Date just 3 days before my grandfather passed away. My parents, their lawyers, the developer, everyone had been working from the main property parcel. Not one of them had any idea that Grandpa had quietly, precisely carved out this specific piece of land long before the rest of the estate ever changed hands. And had left it, clearly, legally, permanently, to Milone. He had known. Long before any of this happened, he had known exactly what my parents were capable of. He had watched them eye his life's work like it was nothing more than an exit ramp from their own poor decisions. And so, without a word to anyone, he made absolutely certain they could never touch the part that mattered most. I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading every word of that document under the dim motel lamp. Then I called an attorney. The closing was set for a Tuesday. The title company's conference room looked expensive, glass walls, leather chairs, the quiet hum of central air and ambition. My parents were already sated when I arrived, dressed as though they were attending a celebration dinner. The developer, a man who carried himself like someone whose hobby was turning old memories into new retail space, was mid-sentence and laughing when I stepped through Thedor. No one had sent me an invitation. I didn't need one. I walked straight to the table and placed the dia directly over the closing documents. The room didn't just go quiet. It went still, the way everything does when something has just broken and no one yet understands how badly. The developer's attorney leaned in. His expression moved slowly, from confusion to concentration, to the unmistakable look of someone realizing they are standing in the middle of a serious problem. "Your father held a life estate," he said, his voice measured and careful. "The right to live on this property, but the actual ownership, the remainder, transferred to her upon his passing. You never had the legal authority to sell this." My father's fingers went slack. The pen rolled off the edge of the table. My mother's face drained to the color of old ash. What came next wasn't drama. It was consequence. The developer's legal team began pulling papers. The earnest deposit, a six-figure amount my parents had already spent, was now sitting at the center of a breach of contract claim that would take years to solve. The question of fraud was something they would have to answer to separately, and not with my help. They had tried to sell something that was never theirs to sell. And the paperwork proved every word of it. I watched something leave my parents in that room, not just the money, not just the deal, but the certainty they had carried for years that they could do whatever they wanted and face no real cost for it. My mother turned to me then, and for the first time in my memory, her face held no sharpness, no control, just raw, hollow desperation. "Chloe," she said softly, "please, you have to help us. We're your family." Family. The same word that was nowhere to be found, the day they changed the locks without calling me. I picked up my grandfather's deed. I folded it exactly as I had found it. I walked out of that room without saying a single word, because everything that needed to be said had already been said by a man who was no longer here, on a piece of paper he hid where only he would think to look. That evening, I drove back to the estate. I sat on the front porch as the sun went down, listening to the creek Grandpa used to describe on quiet afternoons, watching the last light catch the branches off that old oak tree he had planted before I was even born. I made one quiet decision sitting there. The locks are changing again. And this time, I'm Thean Lai one with a key. Grandpa didn't leave me a speech. He didn't leave a dramatic letter. He left me one folded piece of paper, and it turned out to be the only thing that mattered. My parents are now living with the weight of what they chose to do. That's not my burden to carry anymore, but I want to ask you something before you go. If the people who were supposed to protect you tried to take everything instead, would you find a way to forgive them? Or would you let justice do what it's meant to do? Tell me what you think in the comments. And drop your city. I want to know who's out there listening. End of script.